Last October, I wanted to buy a 32GB DDR5 RAM to upgrade my system. It would have been cost me around $90 US. At the time of this video, would cost around $444 US. Not 5%, not 20%, around 500% increase. And that happened in just a few months. So something clearly changed. Historically, RAM prices do fluctuate. They go up and down. But this spike, this one feels different. And once you start digging into the industry, a surprising explanation begins to appear. The short version, AI may be one of the biggest reasons your RAM suddenly became so expensive. But to understand why, we need to zoom out a bit. Most people imagine a competitive market with dozens of memory manufacturers, but the reality is very different. Almost all the world's DRAM comes from just 3 companies: Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. Together they produce around 95% of global DRAM supply. That's not a crowded market. That is practically an oligopoly. So the world depends on these companies to keep the memory flowing. Your laptop RAM, your phone memory, servers, GPUs, consoles, everything. If you followed PC hardware long enough, you know something about memory prices. They move in cycles. When demand rises, prices climb. Manufacturers increase production, but eventually supply catches up. Therefore, prices fall again. This has been happening for decades. But here's the critical detail. These companies do not just decide how much memory to make. They also decide what kind of memory to make. But recently, a completely different kind of customer arrived. And this specific customer willing to pay far more than PC builders ever could. That customer is AI infrastructure. For decades, the biggest buyers of memory were familiar. PC manufacturers, laptop makers, smartphones, game consoles. These industries drove memory demand. But over the last few years, something new appeared: massive AI data centers. Inside these facilities, thousands of GPUs running machine learning models, training them, serving them, or scaling them. And GPUs running AI workloads have one major problem. They are incredibly memory hungry. Large models require enormous bandwidth. But here is where a story gets strange. The memory used in AI GPUs is not the same memory you put in your PC. Normal RAM simply cannot feed data fast enough. Therefore, GPU designers started using a different kind of memory, something much faster, something far more specialized. That memory is called HBM, high bandwidth memory, and it changes everything. Normal RAM like DDR5 is relatively simple, a flat memory chip placed on a module, connected through traces on a motherboard. That design works well for PCs. But GPUs need something very different. They need extreme bandwidth, massive data movements, hundreds of gigabytes per second, sometimes even more. DDR5 cannot reach these speeds efficiently. Physics gets in the way. Distance between chips creates latency. Bandwidth becomes limited. So engineers build a completely different architecture. HBM stacks multiple memory dies vertically, layer on layer, connected with through silicon vias, tiny vertical wires drilled through the silicon. This allows extremely wide memory buses, extremely high bandwidth. That's why GPUs like those used for AI training rely heavily on HBM. But there's a catch. HBM is much harder to manufacture. Memory manufacturers operate huge fabrication plants. These fabs produce silicon wafers. Those wafers are later cut into memory chips. But wafer capacity is limited. Factories cannot instantly double the production. When AI demand exploded, companies suddenly wanted enormous amount of HBM. AI clusters require thousands of GPUs. Each GPU requires stacks of high bandwidth memory, so demand skyrocketed. But building fabs takes years. Therefore, memory manufacturers had only one short-term solution: shift production. More wafers started going towards the HBM, but every wafer used for HBM is one that cannot become DDR5. Therefore, something inevitable happened. The supply of standard RAM began shrinking. At this point, you might wonder, why not just keep producing both? Why prioritize AI at all? Because businesses optimize for profit, not fairness. And here is the key detail. HBM memory sells for far higher margins than DDR5. AI companies buy massive volumes. They are willing to pay premium prices because memory bandwidth directly affects model performance. So from the manufacturer's perspective, the decision becomes obvious. If one wafer can become normal DDR5 models for PCs or extremely profitable HBM stacks for AI clusters, which one would you think the manufacturers will choose? In the nature of corporations, companies choose the higher margin product, and the rest of the market feels the consequences. Price explosions rarely happen because of just one one factor. Usually multiple forces collide. And in this case, several things happened simultaneously. First, AI demand surged incredibly fast. Second, DDR5 adoption is still increasing as older systems upgrade. Third, manufacturers reallocated wafer capacity toward HBM. That combination created a perfect storm. Less supply, but demand is still rising, which leads to exactly what basic economics predicts: a dramatic increase in price. So does this mean RAM will stay expensive forever? Probably not. Memory markets are famously cyclical. Manufacturers are already expanding production capacity. New fabs are being planned. HBM production will increase, but building semiconductor fabs takes years, not months. Therefore, supply adjustments move slowly. Eventually, production will catch up. HBM capacity will stabilize. More wafers may return to consumer memory. And when that happens, prices will likely fall again. But the bigger shift remains. For decades, consumers drove the memory industry. Consumers like gamers, PC builders, or laptop owners. Manufacturers optimized production for those markets because they were the biggest customers. But today, something has changed. The largest buyer of advanced memory is no longer the consumer market. It is AI infrastructure. Massive data centers, thousands of GPUs, entire facilities built to train models. And when these priorities of the industry shift like that, everyone else feels it. Even when you're just trying to buy RAM for your own PC, like me. So the next time you see memory prices jump unexpectedly, there's a good chance the reason is not gaming. It is AI. Until the next video, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Bye.